Hello, everyone. Tonight we are going to slip into the silk-trimmed silence of a Belgian palace, where a boy named Leopold wakes up in starched sheet just as the entire continent is unraveling around him. It's 1914, and while you're worrying about your phone battery, little Leopold is being taught how to politely shake hands with diplomats, while artillery thunders somewhere out past the hedges. Picture it: polished floors, nervous nannies, and every door slightly ajar, because in this household, privacy is a myth and danger is a very real draft blowing in under every window. You might not survive the sheer number of lace collars, brooding stares, and moral contradictions this story contains. So before you get too comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you really like what I'm doing here. And let me know where you're listening from and what time it is where you are. Now, turn off the lights, maybe turn on the fan for some soft noise, and let's get this story started tonight. Leopold was born in 1901, right into the tufted lap of Belgian royalty. Coddled but not carefree, he was the eldest son of King Albert III and Queen Elizabeth, both of whom genuinely cared more about decency than diamonds. Rare, right? His father was known as the Night King for a reason. Albert actually read philosophy and climbed mountains. Not very medieval. By the time Leopold turned 13, Europe had descended into World War I. The timing was just chef's kiss. He was barely tall enough for military boots, and Belgium was already being steamrolled by German forces. The royal family didn't flee. Instead, they took up residence in La Panne, a windswept Belgian town near the front lines. Cozy, if you like sand in your soup and bombs in the distance. Leopold wasn't playing toy soldiers, he was meeting them. He got a crash course in warfare, literally. His parents allowed him to shadow his father on the front. For a moment, it seemed absurd, a child in uniform touring trenches, but Albert wanted his son to see what duty looked like when everything else had broken down. Official historical fact? In 1915, young Leopold actually served with the 12th Belgian Regiment as a corporal. Yes, it was ceremonial. But yes, he wore the uniform, marched the route, and nearly passed out from the smell of unwashed soldiers. Honestly, same. Of course, even war couldn't stop the monarchy from being wildly out of touch. There's one weird anecdote. During a Christmas lull in the fighting, Queen Elizabeth allegedly threw a string quartet concert near the front, insisting that beauty must survive even when teeth are chattering and half the audience has trench foot. A lovely sentiment, if slightly deranged. But beneath the uniforms and music, Belgium was hemorrhaging morale, and Leopold was absorbing every fractured detail. He watched his father make impossible decisions, trying to balance alliances with human lives. And maybe that's what broke something quiet inside him, something he'd never quite get back. Historians still debate whether Leopold's early wartime exposure made him a stronger ruler later, or just prematurely cynical. He saw the limits of diplomacy, the chaos of leadership, and the way people look at royalty when they're starving. It wasn't awe, it was anger wrapped in cold respect. At La Panne, he learned French, Flemish, and German, but also how to keep his voice steady while a nurse is stitching a soldier's face nearby. His tutors kept the Latin lessons going, as if Caesar's declensions mattered more than the distant shellfire. But Leopold listened more to his father's silences than to the grammar drills. And even as the war trudged toward its grim conclusion, the boy prince was already being cast in a role no child ever auditions for: savior, scapegoat, symbol, sometimes all three before breakfast. By 1918, when the guns finally fell quiet, Leopold was 17. Belgium was devastated. The royal family was celebrated but exhausted. The prince had aged in the shadows of misery, groomed to inherit not a kingdom but a cautionary tale, one that was just getting started. The war had scorched everything: fields, cities, and even childhoods. But the royal calendar waits for no trauma. As soon as Leopold turned 18, Belgium decided it was time he stopped brooding in candlelit rooms and started acting like a prince again. So off he went, sent to school in Switzerland like some emotionally scorched international student with diplomatic immunity and 5 pairs of leather gloves. Now, here's where it gets weird. While most boys his age were experimenting with jazz records and awkward flirting, Leopold was studying at the University of Geneva and the École Militaire in Brussels, toggling between algebra and artillery drills. That's what passed for balance in the House of Saxe-Coburg and Gotha. But it wasn't just dusty books and gunpowder. Official historical fact: during this period, Leopold traveled extensively, not just to Europe's royal courts, but to the Belgian Congo. In 1925, he took a months-long tour of the colony, meant to educate him on its administration. Educate? Yes. Confront? Not so much. The whole thing had the awkward energy of a PR stunt crossed with a jungle cruise, complete with gifts, parades, and absolutely no mention of Leopold II's crimes. He was supposed to see progress. He saw pageantry. Back in Europe, however, the young prince was slowly becoming a cultural artifact in his own right. Women gossiped about him in beauty parlors. His profile appeared in pocket-sized newspapers. Unfortunately, the most enduring image from this period is that he somehow maintained the same odd, slicked-back hairstyle from age 14 to 40. You know the one. Like a glossier, slightly confused vampire from a 1930s cologne ad. It never changed. He never changed. Not really. What did change, however, was how people viewed him. The war had made the monarchy look noble, but peace made it look unnecessary. While his father, King Albert I, still enjoyed respect for staying with the troops, Leopold seemed like a reboot nobody asked for. He wasn't a warrior, he wasn't a politician, he was just a prince, a moody, multilingual symbol of a system that fewer people were rooting for. So what did he do? He threw himself into duty, military inspections, state dinners, even, brace yourself, horse judging competitions. In one strange episode, Leopold spent an entire spring helping evaluate cavalry horses for officer selection. The horses, not the officers, because monarchy is full of exactly that kind of nonsense. Still, there were flashes of sincerity. Leopold was deeply interested in science. He read geology, botany, and engineering journals. If you'd handed him a microscope, he might have disappeared into it for days. His friends were few, his diary full of stilted reflections, and yet he kept pressing forward, like a man who didn't quite want to be king, but knew no one else could be. Historians still debate whether this introverted streak made him wise or just catastrophically indecisive. Some argue he was cautious because of trauma. Others say he was simply born with the instincts of a cold fish wrapped in royal ribbon. His teachers admired his discipline, but no one ever called him warm. Meanwhile, Europe was doing that thing it always does between wars, pretending nothing bad would ever happen again. Germany was sulking and rearming. Italy was making fascism look fashionable. Belgium was rebuilding railroads with borrowed money and hoping no one noticed the cracks in its neutrality. And in the middle of all this, Leopold quietly fell in love. Her name was Astrid of Sweden. She was warm where he was brittle. People said she had the smile of a summer lake. They met through the usual royal matchmaking labyrinth, but the affection was real. They married in 1926, and the public adored her. Astrid brought a kind of fairy tale glamour to the otherwise beige Belgian court. Even better, she actually smiled in photographs. The marriage gave Leopold something resembling joy, and for a brief moment, the future looked manageable. Belgium had its prince. He had his princess. And the world, absurdly, was pretending that peace was permanent. Of course it wasn't. The clock was ticking, and when it struck next, it wouldn't just break the continent, it would break the man. In 1934, Leopold became king, but not the way anyone wanted. He and Astrid had just come back from a quiet family trip in Switzerland. They were still in the glow of parenthood. 3 young children, a palace with too many curtains, and mornings that smelled like freshly waxed parquet. But then came a phone call. His father, King Albert I, had died. A mountaineering accident. One slip on a rock, and suddenly Belgium had a 32-year-old monarch with 3 kids and a continent teetering toward madness. Leopold didn't even get time to mourn properly. They barely cleaned the black armbands from the last funeral before the coronation robes came out. His first act as king, trying to not look terrified. Belgium in the mid-1930s was anxious. The economy was wobbly, fascism was chic next door, and no one could decide if being neutral was wise or suicidal. Meanwhile, Leopold kept trying to find a balance between traditional monarchy and modern relevance. The poor guy still wore a sword to cabinet meetings. Official historical fact? In May 1940, when Nazi Germany invaded Belgium, Leopold refused to flee. He stayed with his army. "I will share their fate," he declared. And he did, kind of. He was captured and placed under house arrest, not exactly foxhole material, but symbolically brave. Unfortunately, that decision would split the country like a soggy eclair. Leopold had hoped to be seen as a loyal king. What he got was the nickname the King Prisoner. Some Belgians saw him as a martyr. Others called him a collaborator in royal drag. It gets weirder. During his captivity, he made a truly baffling decision. He married again. Not long after Astrid's tragic death in a car crash in 1935, which had already broken the public's heart, Leopold married Lilian Bales in secret, while Belgium was still under German occupation. Yeah, not the best look. The marriage wasn't just private, it was scandalous. The people adored Astrid. Lilian, by contrast, was seen as haughty, distant, and possibly political. That she became Princess of Rethy felt like a tone-deaf sequel to a beloved classic. Imagine rebooting The Sound of Music with a moody soprano who doesn't like children or sunlight. That was Lilian. And now Leopold was in an impossible position. He wasn't ruling. He wasn't resisting. He was just there. His ministers had fled to London to set up a government in exile, and they were furious. From across the channel, they accused him of cozying up to the Nazis, or at least not being adequately uncozy. Leopold, for his part, wrote letters defending his neutrality and devotion to Belgium. It did not help. Historians still debate whether Leopold's decision to stay behind was an act of bravery or breathtaking political naivety. Did he genuinely think Hitler might respect Belgian independence? Or was he just trying to preserve the monarchy by sitting very, very still until it all blew over? One thing's for sure, when Belgium was liberated in 1944, Leopold was not welcomed back with cheers and waffles. He was still under German guard when Allied tanks rolled through Brussels. It was his brother, Prince Charles. Yes, Belgium had one of those too, who took over as regent. Because at that, no one trusted Leopold not to make things worse. And remember how he used to admire his father's noble leadership during World War I? Well, the irony was now chokingly thick. Where Albert had stayed with dignity and rallied his people, Leopold had married his girlfriend and gone quiet. Leopold's children barely recognized him. His ministers didn't want him. His people weren't sure what he stood for anymore. What he had thought was stoicism had turned into a PR disaster. He had wanted to be a king of peace, of honor, of steady hands in chaos. Instead, he was about to become the monarch no one knew what to do with, especially not himself. Exile, as it turns out, is rarely glamorous, especially when it involves angry press, political committees, and yes, actual bats. After the war ended in 1945, Belgium had a problem named Leopold. Technically, he was still king, but in practice, he was a monarch without a throne, stuck in Switzerland like an awkward in-law no one wants to invite home. The government in exile had returned. His brother Prince Charles was still regent. And every attempt to bring Leopold back sparked protests, pamphlets, and, in one instance, an egg-throwing incident that missed its target, but definitely hit someone's wig. So Leopold stayed put. The royal family rented a villa in Pregny, on the outskirts of Geneva. It was picturesque if you like your scenery with a side of national rejection. Inside, the children studied French grammar while their father brooded over newspapers and moral dilemmas. Outside, there was a persistent bat infestation in the attic that no one could quite get rid of. No symbolism there, just screechy flapping and the occasional guano incident during breakfast. Life was humbling like that. Official historical fact? Between 1945 and 1950, Belgium underwent what it called the Royal Question, a years-long national debate about whether Leopold should return. Political parties split, families split. Even neighbors stopped talking. The Catholic South largely supported him. The socialist, liberal North, not so much. Leopold did try to explain himself. He published a memorandum in 1945, laying out his reasons for staying in Belgium during the Nazi invasion, defending his secret remarriage, and pleading for understanding. But if you've ever tried to explain your side of things 5 years after the drama, you know how that goes. And then there was Lilian. She was, to put it mildly, not helping. While Astrid had been the fairy tale queen, Lilian was more like a well-dressed thundercloud. She banned photographs, alienated journalists, and gave off the vibe of someone who would send back a salad twice. Belgium had warmed to Astrid's charm. Lilian's hauteur felt like a bad sequel with a worse script. In Switzerland, Leopold and Lillian threw themselves into academic reading, writing, and various philanthropic causes. But the sense of disconnection was palpable. Even the children picked up on it, especially Baudouin, the eldest. He had grown serious, even priestly, and clearly understood that if his father couldn't come home, he might have to. Meanwhile, back in Belgium, things were simmering. People marched in the streets with signs that read, "Leopold never again," and "He let us down." Even school teachers began tiptoeing around how they described the king in civics class. One poor geography instructor was nearly fired for referring to Leopold as the guy with bad timing. Historians still debate whether Leopold's exile was prolonged by his own stubbornness or by a government unwilling to risk more chaos. Some claim he refused compromise, clinging to dignity while the world moved on. Others argue he was simply out of touch, a man raised to rule in an age that had stopped believing in kings. It all came to a head in 1950 when Belgium held a national referendum, a literal vote to decide the fate of one man. The results? About 57% supported Leopold's return, but that number concealed a terrifying fracture. In Flanders, he had strong support. In Wallonia, rejection. In Brussels, chaos. He came back, briefly, and it was worse than expected. Upon Leopold's return, Belgium convulsed with strikes and riots. One protest led to deadly violence. 4 workers were killed in Gross-Berleur. The air was thick with rage, not reverence. The monarchy was becoming not a symbol of unity, but of division. And so once again, Leopold packed his things. Not for exile this time, but for the most reluctant retirement in Belgian history. On August 1st, 1950, just 16 days after returning to Belgium, Leopold made an announcement that was less royal decree and more dad's had enough. He would step aside, not abdicate technically, but delegate his powers to his 20-year-old son Baudouin, because nothing says national healing like handing your divided kingdom to someone who still hadn't finished his dental work. Baudouin was young, reserved, and clearly molded to be the anti-Leopold. Pious, humble, and allergic to controversy. The contrast was intentional. Belgium wanted a king who waved politely and didn't marry anyone during an invasion. Official historical fact, on July 16, 1951, Leopold officially abdicated, not delegated, not postponed, abdicated. It was the first Belgian royal abdication in history. Baudouin became king while Leopold disappeared into the background. Almost. And let's talk about what that background looked like. The former king moved to the Argenteuil estate outside Brussels with Lillian, where they turned royal irrelevance into an art form. They lived in semi-seclusion, surrounded by books, gardens, and enough dogs to start a minor kennel. Leopold, never great with leisure, took up biological research and wrote dense, unreadable essays about genetics, evolution, and social decay. Lillian hosted the occasional dinner with Vatican emissaries and physicists. Nobody had fun. The Belgian press called them the Silent Palace, because not even the walls were talking anymore. Still, the former king didn't disappear completely. He kept tabs on Baudouin's reign, offering suggestions that were mostly ignored. And he never shook the feeling that history had misunderstood him. At dinner parties, he'd murmur about honor and misjudgment, while the soup slowly cooled. Guests learned to nod sympathetically, then quietly escape before dessert. Weird fact time? Leopold had a secret stash of letters, speeches, and notes he hoped to publish one day, a final defense of his wartime choices. They were discovered after his death in 1983, but most were deemed too opaque or too dull to release. Imagine spending your life writing a rebuttal that no one wanted to read. Meanwhile, Baudouin quietly repaired the monarchy's image. He visited Congo, disastrously, but still, married Queen Fabiola, beloved, and ruled with a seriousness that felt almost monastic. Leopold watched all this with the wariness of a man who had once tried to do everything right, and still watched it all unravel. Historians still debate whether Leopold was a tragic figure undone by fate or a tone-deaf autocrat who never read the room. Was he a man trying to embody dignity in an age of populism or a royal ghost who haunted his own legacy? Even now, Belgium doesn't quite know what to do with him. His name sits awkwardly in textbooks. Streets named after him get side eyes. Statues of him are cleaned but never honored. He's the monarch everyone remembers, but no one knows how to explain. And then there's Astrid. Decades after her death, her memory still glows. Her children, especially Baudouin, kept her image alive, beloved, pure, untouchable. She became the emotional core of a family that had lost everything else. But Leopold, he aged into silence. No final speech, no dramatic reckoning, just a slow fade into obscurity, surrounded by files, dogs, and a wife who never quite fit into the frame. He died in 1983 at the age of 81. The funeral was respectful but not grand. Baudouin, now an elder statesman himself, gave a eulogy that was careful, dignified, but with the emotional range of a weather report. And that was it. The man who had once been Belgium's hope, then its scandal, then its ghost, finally, quietly, disappeared. So if you're still awake, if your fan's humming gently and the room's gone cool, you might be wondering what, if anything, we're supposed to take from Leopold III's life. It's not a neat story. There are no sharp endings or easy lessons, just a boy who wanted to be worthy, a man who tried to do the right thing, and a king who discovered that timing is everything. He wasn't evil. He wasn't glorious. He was a ruler built for a world that no longer existed by the time he arrived. Leopold thought courage was staying with his people. Belgium thought courage was knowing when to leave. And somewhere between those two ideas, something broke. Not just in him, but in the very idea of monarchy itself. He lived long enough to see his legacy questioned, re-examined, and quietly shelved. Not condemned, not celebrated, just set aside, like a dusty crown that doesn't quite fit anymore. But maybe that's the story of modern royalty. Not tragedy, not triumph, just relevance slowly slipping away. So if you're still with me, tucked beneath your blankets and listening as the world outside your window softens into silence, remember Leopold not as a hero or villain, but as a warning. Power is fragile, symbols crack, and even kings can be forgotten while they're still alive. Now breathe slowly. Let your thoughts drift. Let your screen dim, and sleep while the past quietly folds itself away behind you.